Good evening. I'm Anuj Mehrotra, Dean of the George Washington University School of Business, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you who have joined us in person as well as online to this episode of George Talks Business. Today's session is actually hosted in partnership with the Office of Pam Norris, who is the Vice Provost for Research, as part of the STEM and GW Policy series. Today, we'll be talking about the evolving cybersecurity landscape and what we should be doing about it. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our guest, Joe Klimavicz, Managing Director of CIO Advisory at KPMG. And immediately preceding this current role, he served as the CIO in the Department of Justice Deputy Attorney General's Office. Thank you very much for joining us today, Joe.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
Great. I would also like to thank many people in our audience for submitting their questions in advance. We have tried to incorporate them insofar as possible. So let's jump right in. Over the past week, we have been deeply shaken by and are watching with anguish the situation in Ukraine following the invasion by Russian military. Can you share your perspective on how the current crisis in Ukraine may impact cybersecurity globally?
Well, first off, my thoughts and prayers are with the people over in the Ukraine impacted by the war, terrible events. But I would say that what we've seen is denial of service attacks have been ongoing for quite some time against critical infrastructure within Ukraine, and also discovered some very sophisticated and destructive malware that's also been identified. And I would say as the financial pressures, the global pressures on Putin become more intense, that I would expect to see that attacks become more global in nature, especially around the financial and critical infrastructure sectors, and they'll be targeted and really in retaliation for the sanctions that have been put on him. I think DHS, Department of Homeland Security, FBI have been very good about putting out alerts and things that whether you're a federal agency or corporate America need to be paying attention to. And there's a long list, and I'm not going to repeat all those, but I think some of the best things is patching. One of the biggest things that you can do to further protect your environment is just patch vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities. Microsoft has identified that 99% of the times that a Microsoft service gets compromised, there was a known patch out there, just wasn't applied. So, I mean, these patches exist. When I was in those kind of roles, always making sure that things are patched. The other is multi-factor authentication to log into systems, two-factor, whether it be a government PIV card or an RSA token, something like that. And then, look, these are all good security practices. You should follow what the FBI, DHS are recommending, but none of those will guarantee security 100%. So one thing I would recommend for all, either federal agencies or corporate entities is to kind of dust off your incident response plans, making sure that you factor in good cyber practices, having your data backed up offsite, not connected to your primary system, because a lot of times your primary system gets compromised, your backup systems will as well. Be able to recover if you get compromised.
So we'll definitely dive a little bit deeper into it, but let me get into the cybersecurity policy issues. I believe there was an executive order that suggested action items directed at the federal agencies. Can you tell us a little bit about this executive order, I believe 14028, for improving the nation's cybersecurity a little bit more? And what in this policy did we get right, and where may be some gaps in that?
Yeah, so it's Executive Order 14028. And I appreciate the White House making it easy for me to remember the number. But that was a very massive policy document. And it was signed out by the president last May and had over 70 actions in there. And most of these actions were directed at federal agencies. But this is a good step forward. It's a very aggressive executive order. A lot of those things that were called out in there were already underway. But when you look at it, the fundamental challenge with something like that, like implementing zero trust or securing our supply chain, is that the federal landscape is very large. It's a very large attack surface. Many people may not realize that the federal government spends about $100 billion per year on IT. And that's a large amount of money, and not much of that gets retired. So we just keep building more systems, more complexity. And it's all great, but that's a huge attack surface. The other is attacking critical infrastructure, financial institutions. It's really pretty risk-free for state actors, criminal organizations, and a lot of the attacks are actually coming from criminal organizations. It's a very lucrative business and it's very sophisticated. It's very different than when I started my career, and there was a lot of hackers, and you could actually say around the Christmas to New Year's holiday when universities were out of schools were shut down, you could actually watch the spikes going way up in terms of the hacks, and those were relatively minor, and it's just kind of laughed at those things, people trying things. Now it's well-funded state actors with a lot of very sophisticated technology. If I could just, two things that I think that the EO gets right is moving workloads to commercial cloud environments. These big companies have put they've invested a lot into cybersecurity, and that can improve your security. The other is zero trust, implementing zero trust. When I say zero trust, what that means is you assume that the user's identity, devices, software, network, and data could all be compromised. So you don't trust one thing. So when I started my career, we had fairly closed systems. And if you had gained access to that system, you gained access to all the data within that system. And that's a really bad premise today. What you want to do today is you want to have micro virtualization, micro segmentation, where you're segmenting out the users from the data, from the network, and that's all very critical. So just one of the things, if I could just point, supply chain. A lot of the issues that we've seen that have been in the news, the Colonial Pipeline, for instance, a lot of those things relate to supply chain challenges where you need to look at companies, products, services, and CIOs have historically focused on the infrastructure, the IT that is supporting the mission, not the HVAC systems or that are connected to the network. And those represent, I think, huge vulnerabilities that foreign adversaries are taking advantage of.
Yeah, so let me bring it down. So there's a huge 70 action executive order you're talking about. Let me bring it out from a consumer perspective. How do I know that the software that I'm using has been built securely? I've heard people talk about experiments where they have like multiple devices and all of them being hacked at the same time within seconds. And you would be scared to use your iPhone or iPad once you've seen something like this. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, my wife just bought a new car and last weekend, and first thing it comes with is an app. And through this app, you can unlock your car, you can start it. I think it probably can even drive by the app. And this is, on one hand, this is
I might need that, yes.
Well, on one hand, this is great because consumers, citizens are demanding more and more services, capabilities, and those capabilities are there. But on the other hand, they represent a tremendous vulnerability. So one thing that the executive order did spend a lot of time on the supply chain. And when you look at the risk to the supply chain, they can threaten our national security, our economic security, the public health and safety, amongst other things. And the risk can come about from a lot of different things. It's not just the software, but it's political, environmental, manufacturing. We also saw during COVID the transportation. So there's a lot of different aspects of that. I think it's fair to say that the assessments today, traditional ways of looking at third-party risks are outdated, and the executive order tried to bring in some new concepts like a software bill of materials, and but the bottom line is that you really need to have visibility into your supply chain, and you need to understand how the products are being manufactured, who's overseeing them, to what standards. The other thing is there's also an Energy Star concept in there, much like certifying appliances that they use so much energy, and this is great conceptually, but I actually did this when I was in the government, where we actually looked at software, not just did an acceptance on the risk, but as new versions of software were out there, running it through essentially checks and evaluating software for any vulnerabilities and stuff. And that's really hard to do. And it's hard to do at scale. So verifying, for the government to verify that software has no vulnerabilities in it, doing it at scale is going to be near impossible. I think that this is how I would approach supply chain and knowing whether the products and the services you're bringing into your environment are secure, is try to understand how those products were produced, where they're produced, and then essentially build a dependency map. You could do a visual map laying out all those things. And then so Log4j was a recent vulnerability that was in a lot of different products. And so when you have this mapping of everything coming into your environment, you can go back and go, I can remediate here, I need to remediate there, I have in this. But the other thing is if adversaries get into kind of core products that everybody's using that are key to everything, it's hard to remediate, hard to get all the software cleaned up.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. And of course, there are all these executive orders, and the government can come in and come back with all these ideas. But how do you incentivize the industry to really collaborate and cooperate? Because without the industry and the government collaboration around these topics, the gaps will only be there for sure. And even with all the collaboration, there may still be gaps, as you're pointing out.
Well, that's an excellent point. And a lot of efforts have failed. And that executive order was really aimed at federal agencies, but I think, and I would hope, that industry would also adopt a lot of these measures and initiatives, because they're just as important on the private side as they are in the federal. And they did talk about target some of the suppliers of hardware and software to the federal government having to follow those same standards. And there's also some, DoD has a CMMC initiative that applies to industry to essentially make sure that industry is, they've followed all the right security standards. But I think to me, it's a combination of carrot and stick. You've got to incentivize industry to take advantage of some of these security controls and things that should be in there, doing the right thing. But you've also got to help them a little bit with maybe grants or preferential treatment on acquisitions, maybe even direct assistance. Because one of the things when I would try to get people to do things in the government that they didn't want to do, they would say, I'd love to do that, Joe, but I don't have the technical expertise. I'll supply you the technical expertise. Don't worry about it. I also think maybe NIST is National Institutes of Standards and Technology. It's kind of the gold standard for how you should secure your. They'll publish these documents on how you should secure your environment. That's kind of the gold standard, but they won't tell you exactly how to do it. And I think sometimes industry is looking for a little more prescriptive. If I do this, will I be good? And will you leave me alone? That kind of stuff. So I think that's one area. The last area I'd mention is I think transparency. Transparency has served me really well in my career. And sometimes, a lot of times you can't get people to do things that you want them to do. So if you're really transparent about it and highlighting who's doing a good job, who's not, as we saw with Ukraine and Russia, where a lot of corporations now are just dropping, they're not doing business with Russia anymore, and that's great. But it's almost like as soon as everybody started seeing other corporations doing the right thing, then they wanted to do the right thing as well. So I think sometimes you just got to shine a light on it and go from there.
Excellent points there. So one of our students, Joe, submitted a question. His name is George, and he said, What technology, if any, if you're thinking about in terms of emerging technologies, are going to be helpful as breakthroughs to have a potential for significant change as it pertains to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, like I said, in the EO in terms of kind of what's out there today, what needs to be done today. But I was thinking about what happens beyond zero trust, or how does zero trust evolve as the technology will definitely evolve. Nobody's slowing that down, or the threats change. One of the things that I think will be potentially a game changer is quantum computing. There's a lot of disagreement about when is quantum computing going to be real. And maybe for you and I, it's not going to be real for quite some time, maybe decades. But for big corporations, states, state entities, I think it's real pretty soon. I mean, and I think that the promise there is that it will do great things and solve problems that can't be solved with conventional computing, but it can also be a threat to our encryption. It has capability or potential to break today's toughest encryption. And that may mean that we look at alternatives. There are companies out there that are saying, I have quantum resistant encryption today, packages, products. There are other companies that are looking at sharding the data, essentially breaking the data up into millions of little pieces. So I don't have to encrypt the data because, and my secret sauce is I can bring it back together again very quickly. And Google does this today, but corporations are looking, other startups are looking at being able to do this at much finer resolution. AI is artificial intelligence today is key in both providing defense in terms of cyber attacks. But what does a AI-powered cyber attack look like? When I see the initial attack going, I've got all these things that I'm going through, right? I'm going to step through. I'm going to do some basic block and tackle kind of things. If it's just I think it's a kind of a weak attack. But if it's more sophisticated, I've got different things I can do. And a lot of the cyber tools in security operations centers today are powered by AI. AI is being used to aggregate the data to look for basically shadows or ghosts in your network. But when the adversary is using AI, that's something that I think it's going to be really interesting. And while you're on topic of AI, SecDevOps or DevSecOps, building security into your applications is something everybody's trying to do now, right? I mean, so it's not an afterthought, it's not bolted on. So you build security into your applications and you assume that your applications are not going to change, but you look at AI algorithms and they have to change and evolve, or they're not really learning, right? They're not doing their job. So when applications can rewrite themselves, when they can evolve, and there's been studies out there that two AI algorithms actually start developing their own language and start doing their own stuff. It's a really weird situation. I just say one other area too is that I see a trend that I'm not sure I like as much, and that is paying for privacy. Especially when you look in the insurance business, if I let the insurance company track my car and how I use the car, or if I let them track my health and everything, then they'll give me lower rates. And what this to me amounts to is you're paying for privacy, and that to me is I don't know, it's something I need to think about. But just a lot of things like that. I would just last thing I'd just say is, I actually know the real founder of the internet, the father of the internet, Vince Cerf, and he's still out there working. He actually wrote the IEEE requirements for TCP/IP, and he never envisioned that this is what happened to the internet. And maybe we need to look at how the internet could be re-architected. There's a lot of thoughts on that one, and maybe that's a good research paper for some of your students.
Well, that is awesome. I mean, these are fascinating concepts that you're talking about here. Well, let me ask a different question. Oftentimes, I was having a conversation with a faculty member, and she was asking about how do you see facial recognition disrupting cybersecurity protocols? So for example, if I'm an international traveler, should I be trusting more the idea that there's an actual physical agent who's going to look at my passport, et cetera, or should I be using the apps to be able to just somehow be able to get the verification through a machine? So where does cybersecurity land with regard to what is the right thing to do here?
Well, there's what's going to happen, and then I'm going to tell you what my thoughts. Then those two might not be the same. I'm going to tell you that there's virtually nothing that can't be faked today. All right. Every known sense that the human can sense can be faked. All right. Voices can be impersonated by computers. I capture your voice, just a small segment of it, and I can have a computer that can talk, and you can call the help desk and basically gain access to systems that you shouldn't have access to because of impersonating. Fingerprints, we know, have been captured, impersonated, and you don't actually have to have the real person or the real fingerprints or the real fingers. Faces can be impersonated. If somebody really wanted to get through one of those things, I mean, you can do masks and that kind of stuff. The way the facial recognition is working, though, it's not actually, it's doing all a mathematical kind of calculation, and it's distances between the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the lips, different facial features, and so on. I'm not as convinced that all those things couldn't be altered just slightly, and my view is that there's just nothing you can really trust out there. Potentially DNA maybe, but everything else, it's...
I have known, I've been, this is not something that is in my head, I have been known to talk to myself, but it's actually another person who's talking to me, and I don't even understand how that's happening.
You can't know. I mean, the fake individuals, the videos,
yeah.
I actually don't know why Hollywood hires actors and actresses anymore, because you can do it. You can create your own people, and they work a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to take some more questions for him. If you want to ask a question, we might have a chance for a couple of questions. If you want to just line up behind the mic while we continue the conversation, that'll be helpful. So let me ask you a little bit differently here. Tell us a little bit about some of the research. You mentioned one area for research for our faculty. As a university, as we are pursuing this STEM policy at GW initiative, can you give us some ideas about what kind of research may be supportable, for example, by corporate world as well as government projects here in the area of cybersecurity?
I think a lot of the things we just mentioned, that technology is going to change, and how do I secure that technology? I'm always looking for companies that are whether they be in universities or startups, venture capitalists that are investing in really innovative ideas on different ways of looking at it. And I think it's really, a lot of the basic stuff is important, and you've got to do the basics. But what kind of solutions are out there that might allow me to save a lot of money, be more efficient in terms of how I deploy things? Things like VPNs. I'm not sure that everybody VPNs into their network. I'm sure the university has VPNs here. I don't think you actually need those if you actually have zero trust. Could save money and make things a lot faster. I think figuring out ways to do security faster, better, cheaper, those are all those things that are going to sell. But I also think technologies like digital twinning. Can I build a digital twin very rapidly of my infrastructure and then play what if scenarios, kind of wargaming? Where are my vulnerabilities? Auditors that come in to assess the risk, in an environment, they want to get into the environment, look at it. Well, just make a digital twin. There's a lot of capability out there. I think it's in its infancy, but they're building digital twins of nuclear power reactors, and they're using that now to actually certify the reactors. How can that be applied to IT, to operations? But I think that I could never afford, and I don't think most corporations or government agencies can afford to build a clone of their infrastructure yet I can afford to build a digital twin maybe, and then I can play all kinds of what-if scenarios. So there's a lot of things out there.
Great. Well, we do have a question here, so please state your name and your program, and very short question with a question mark at the end, hopefully.
Great,
Yes.
of course. Hi there, thank you so much. My name is Max Stein, currently a senior studying international business and business analytics here at GW. So this is kind of a bit of a quick two-parter, but you've mentioned a lot of cyber scenarios today. I was wondering, what are the biggest threats, I guess, that you're most concerned about within the industry? And then on the happy note, what is the optimism that you see with the talent coming in, with the technology that briefly that you mentioned?
A very, very good question. So I think as far as, in the federal space, it's the incredible attack surface that's out there. Bad actors only have to find one vulnerability and they get in. And then you think about the supply chain, and that's huge as well. So it's just there's a lot to defend, and that's in the sophistication of the attacks. To me, I know what we can do as a country. I'm assuming that other big countries can essentially launch similar attacks, but you also don't need a huge army to launch these kind of cyber attacks. You need a couple of really smart people with a couple of big computers, and you're in business, right? So the fact is that these attacks can originate from just about anywhere. You don't need a huge investment. They can be very sophisticated. There's a lot of tools out there on the dark web in terms of helping you. What I was always concerned about was that somebody was on my network that I didn't know about. Every day I go to work and something bad is happening, but I just don't have the visibility into it. And that's not a good place to be when you're in a CIO or CISO's role, that somebody will have some issue with that. Now, as far as most optimistic about it is there's a lot of attention being paid to cybersecurity right now. And this is a really, really hot area to be in. And, if you're in cybersecurity, or if you have even any other degree and you want to, minor or a couple of classes in computer science or cyber, you're worth a lot more because there are jobs. I'll just say that KPMG is hiring for cybersecurity professionals, but you don't need to have a PhD in computer science to work in cybersecurity. There's a whole range of jobs and there's a lot of federal programs right now to help fund and pay for the upskilling of the workforce in cyber. A lot of incentives, and we have actually tried to get a lot of returning vets from Iraq and Afghanistan to go through essentially a crash course or a boot camp, and in a couple of weeks they're able to work in a cyber environment. But that so there's entry level jobs, there's very advanced jobs, but there's a whole spectrum of things that are out there, and we see people really wanting to work in these areas, anywhere from operations to policy, strategy, architecture, and technology. So I think that we're getting there, but we're not quite there because everybody needs cyber professionals right now.
Great. So let me ask you a final question,
Sure.
Joe, given the time. You mentioned there were a lot of jobs at KPMG.
Yeah.
Could you tell our students how to get those jobs and who to contact?
Well, I've left my card here. We do post all of our jobs openings on our website, but certainly can reach out to me if you're interested. Again, we help corporations out. We help federal agencies out. Cybersecurity is one of our biggest practice on both the federal and commercial side. But let me just give you some magnitude too. I said the federal agencies spend $100 billion a year on IT. And what I always wanted in my portfolio was 7% or more of that overall IT spend went to cybersecurity. So that means in the federal government, $7 billion a year is spent on cybersecurity. That's a lot of money. And if you're in corporate world, I maintain that every every organization out there is a data organization, and they all better take security very seriously. So they're also probably spending in the neighborhood of 7% of their overall IT spend on cyber. That's a huge spend, and I don't think there's a higher calling out there than protecting, the national security, the economic security of this country, our way of life, public health, and safety. It's a great job. The only thing I'd say is be aggressive, take risks, be passionate about your job, and it's a great profession.
Well, thank you, Joe, for a wonderful conversation. Really inspiring words at the end there as well. I would also like to thank all of you who have joined us today in person or online, and invite you to the next session, a very special session again of George Talks Business, which is actually in recognition of International Women's Day. Next week, we'll invite you to join a virtual panel discussion with winners of Globant Awards, Women That Build Edition. This award recognizes women who have made their careers in technology, manage innovation and collaboration, and promote diversity and inclusion. And this particular event will be hosted in partnership with GW School of Business Dean's Diversity Council. We look forward to that conversation and hope you're able to join us. Thank you again.